He walked slowly and with some difficulty along the beaten-up road, with his jacket slung over his shoulder, unable to break the habit of looking back every 50 yards, hoping to see the amber light of a London cab. The road, if that's what it might be respectfully called, was a hammered-down congregation of broken concrete, brick, and beach stone. No comfortable route for his expensively handmade shoes, originally crafted for smooth Belgravia paving. There were precious few tokens of his former life remaining, but these beautiful shoes and his fashionably rumpled linen suit were treasures from which he was not prepared to part in a hurry. These and his ridiculous Rolex Daytona watch. Not a great deal to show for a long career in advertising that, while never claiming to be glittering, had nonetheless been financially rewarding. Although the slope of the road was gentle, the hill was long, the afternoon growing warmer, and Wordsworth was obliged to take a couple of rest stops on the way, only making the urgency of a cleansing ale that much greater. He had never before felt the need for fitness, certainly not the kind of fitness that many of his colleagues at the London Advertising Agency pursued with religious zeal. Wordsworth refused to run. If he was ever in a hurry, which in itself was quite rare, he would jump in a cab. The buildings at the lower end of the road were thinly distributed, many of them little more than scruffy beach huts. He paused by one of these to catch his breath as the incline steepened slightly. This was a small, neglected bungalow, ugly in its dull green corrugated iron cladding, its windows hung with shabby net curtains, and almost totally consumed by a broad and abundant vegetable garden. Gazing idly around the neat lines of root crops, he was taken aback by the emergence from a large fruit cage of an old man wearing dark blue grubby overalls and carrying a Dutch hoe. Chickens scratched around in the ground, and a crudely written sign read, "Free-range eggs, £1 a dozen." "Afternoon," said the old man called. "That's a nice day for a bit of a stroll." The man moved slowly, dragging his sentences as though they were a burden. Wordsworth flinched at the words, fearing that maybe the old man wished to engage him in a conversation concerning the cultivation of carrots, but not wishing to appear rude, he mumbled some kind of acknowledgment and hurried on. As he approached High End, Wordsworth noted that the buildings became sturdier. Fine Georgian houses of flint construction stood alongside substantial Jacobean dwellings with lime-plastered walls painted a deep Suffolk pink. Terraces of exquisite Victorian cottages sat a little way off the road, with a wide, well-maintained strip of greensward between their front door and the curb. As the road widened onto the village square and the rough rubble gave way to smooth tarmac, he felt himself in the presence of an altogether more agreeable neighbourhood than at Low End. Here were a number of fine and varied double-fronted Georgian dwellings, their doors and windows tastefully painted in essential faro and ball colours. Here also was the stout parish rooms glowering imperiously beneath a steep pitched roof line and placed about with tall sash-cored windows. Neighbouring that, the village baker, displaying a fashionable range of sourdough breads, almond croissants, and pastry delights of every kind. In the corner of the square, a small, expensive-looking antique shop with bulging panelled glass bow window cozied up to a very ancient St. Nicholas's Church with its routine scraps of ruined Norman Abbey tacked on the side. A stout vicarage stood proudly by, set beyond a manicured lawn and smartly clipped formal hedging, its broad oak front door deeply polished. But there, nestling invitingly in the opposite corner, the Royal Oak, a 17th century timber-framed building capped by an immaculately manicured reed thatch. This was a drinking establishment much more to his liking. Approaching the entrance, Wordsworth caught a glimpse of the sheltered car park at the side of the building, and his curiosity took him round to gaze with envy at the polished metal parked within. He hadn't seen such gleaming vehicles since leaving his beloved Porsche in the agency car park 3 years ago. "Still, my beating heart," whispered Wordsworth, with the faintest hint of a tear in his eye. As he stepped into the cool of the wine-coloured bar, he was greeted with the delicious aroma of lunch, the subdued buzz of polite, intelligent conversation from cultured-looking, well-dressed customers, and the welcoming smile of a smart young barman. The thick woolen carpet, heavy brocade curtains, and sumptuously upholstered seating created an acoustic that gave the room a tingling frisson of murmured comfort. Large leather sofas and high-backed Chesterfield armchairs were casually arranged by low occasional tables, each of them occupied by a more discerning customer, Wordsworth judged. From the bar he could see through to the busy restaurant, which boasted silver candlesticks, chandeliers, and linen napkins. Such a display for a wilderness location like this only narrowly skirted pretensions in Wordsworth's experience, but he found himself now in a forgiving frame of mind. Gazing around the room, he observed a surprising collection of fine quality original paintings through a number of genres and techniques, from large Victorian oils to more contemporary watercolours. Most of the tables were occupied by small groups of expensively dressed women, the fabric of their clothes, conservative in style and colour, rippled when they moved to pick up a glass of sparkling water. Their choice of styling carefully avoided any hint of conspicuous fashion, and they all seemed to have had their hair very recently trimmed. On other tables were gatherings of stern men in business suits, hunched over notepads, handing around poorly designed leaflets and negotiating trade deals. There was no raucous laughter to be heard, no rough voices. These were homogeneous groupings. There was no diversity. Nobody wore an inappropriate hat or played the banjo. Nobody rocked the boat. Everything was as it should be, and this was how Wordsworth liked it. "How may I help you, sir?" Wordsworth gazed along the glittering, enticing line of polished brass and steel beer pumps, struggling to make a choice. "The Sam Adams Boston Ale is good," said the barman helpfully. "Excellent," said Wordsworth. "A pint, please. Do you have any sandwiches?" "The bar snacks menu is on your left." Wordsworth gulped with admiration and alarm as he ran his eyes down the list. The choice was magnificent and the prices fearsome. He didn't wish to humiliate himself by ordering the cheapest item, although none of them could be called cheap. The least expensive was an open sandwich of Serrano ham and manchego cheese, served with a salad of microleaves. Wordsworth chose calamari with quinoa and pea shoots. The barman entered the order onto a screen and turned to Wordsworth. £17.80, please. Wordsworth's hand was shaking slightly as he rummaged through the litter bin that was his wallet and pulled out a £20 note from amongst the scraps of paper. He surveyed the bar in search of a seat, but all were taken. "Is there a garden?" Yes, sir. I'll bring your food out. After 2 hours or more of self-indulgent procrastination, Wordsworth steeled himself for the journey back down the hill, and to attempt to solve the major problem that was lurking at the water's edge. His delicious lunch and a couple of pints had served to temporarily banish this inconvenience from his mind, but he had to conclude that the battered object would not move itself, and surely someone was bound to notice its ugly presence sooner or later. Approaching the end of the road with a light-headed glow, he could see a number of people standing around the car, some peering inside, some idly chatting. So Wordsworth proceeded to do the obvious thing and pretended it was nothing to do with him. He climbed some concrete steps built into the grassy bank overlooking a broad salt marsh and set off along the sea wall with no particular purpose in mind. He watched with mild interest as some kind of wading bird, unfamiliar with Wordsworth, scrambled along the water's edge, busily stabbing at the mud with their sharp beaks, leaving in their wake a crazy network of footprints. The mud stank overpoweringly of rotting matter. He was fully aware that this landscape was beautiful and peaceful, but he was also aware that it was hideously muddy. He was wearing his only pair of Church's brogues, which were brushing up the mud onto the leg of his beige linen Paul Smith suit. Wordsworth walked the sea wall alone. It was getting late. He could see that the tide was out along the estuary and the mud banks were quivering with wailing birds on their last feeding frenzy of the day. A gentle breeze carried upon it the haunting sounds of curlews, redshanks, oyster catchers. A cormorant sat patiently on a stump of wood in mid-stream, and a marsh harrier swept low over the reeds, his day's hunt not yet concluded. Wordsworth, taking little notice of this activity, made his way back to the ferry. It was dark by the time he got to the car, and he was having difficulty locating the lock without street lamps. He had never experienced such darkness and silence. He feared the owls would start hooting, or other more terrifying sound effects. The walk back had left him cold and damp, so he climbed onto the back seat and lay down with his knees pulled up to his chest. In the total blackness, the car became a sensory deprivation chamber in which he was trapped by fear. He lay shivering, thinking of all the people who had abandoned him, the many figures in his life who he blamed for his downfall, his lovers and his professional friends. But before long, he fell into a restless sleep.